Well, Jen, welcome back for another take two. As I was saying, you are the first guest to be on a second time. It's truly an honor. You're such a wealth of information. I love our conversations. I could talk with you for hours, and I'm really excited to dive into metabolic health today with you.
Me too. Thanks for having me. And I love to be back on your show. It's amazing. So thank you.
You're very sweet. So, Jen, let's start off with the basics because I feel like, again, so many people are throwing this term metabolic health around. There's a lot of confusion around it. And I just want to kind of level set for everyone, myself included. But starting with the foundational question, what do we mean when we say metabolic health and why is it so important?
Yeah, I think what I wanted to highlight a little bit was that term basics and starting with the basics because I feel like there is a lot of confusion out there. And so many people are trying to do all this biohacking and they're taking all these supplements and they're jumping on one diet, extreme
Yeah.
diet, or the next extreme diet. And that just, I feel like we're kind of missing the point a little bit. I feel like basic metabolic health is all about balance. And it's about having really balanced blood sugar, balanced energy, balanced stress. We're all going to have stress, but hopefully it's not super high or super low. Same thing with blood sugar. We need inflammation, right? Inflammation is an important part of the body's process, but we don't want to be always inflamed. If
Yep.
we're always inflamed, the body can't deal with some other things that might come up where it needs to attend to, right? Like healing an injury or something like that. So I really feel like health means we are balanced and hopefully we aren't, walking around. And I know we'll talk about it, but with metabolic syndrome, um,
Mhm.
we're having to reach for snacks and coffee in the afternoon or take a nap, things like that. That doesn't tell me somebody has metabolic health. So hopefully that kind of sets the stage a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head too. I feel like there are certain quote unquote symptoms, right, by which we can measure if we're metabolically flexible, meaning do we get hangry pretty often? Do we have to take naps, right, frequently? But aside from those observable things, what are some of the best ways to actually evaluate our metabolic health from like a biomarker perspective?
Yeah, if we're talking about biomarkers, we can look at blood work, lab work. We can look at some pretty simple lab work too to see if there's a lot of inflammation in the system. So that can be really helpful. So, one marker that we look at often, especially in the sort of cancer space, is hsCRP or high sensitive C reactive protein. And that's a marker of, that can show inflammation. We also, there's several different markers from a blood sugar perspective, metabolic perspective. I also, of course, love to look at things like fasting glucose.
Yeah.
Um, I love to see fasting insulin, and it's not very common that somebody tests for that. You have to
I
kind
was
of
just going
ask
to
for it.
say that's a rare one to
It is.
actually find as part
Um,
of a regular panel.
Yeah, but it's awesome. It's really
Yeah.
great to know. And looking at hemoglobin A1C, and hemoglobin A1C is kind of that measure of blood sugar over a 3-month period. It uses hemoglobin to track that marker. So that's another one. There are multiple numbers to or markers. There's also a lot of people walking around with, those continuous glucose monitors on their
Mhm.
arm, the CGM you'll hear people talk about, and that can show us not only our fasting blood sugar, but it can show us what's happening post eating. It also tracks in the middle of the night. So if somebody dropping super duper low, so it's really great because there's all these tools out there to track and see what your metabolic health is doing. But also, there's a biometric around, looking at, and I forget the ratio, but when you look at mid body weight in a lot of people, so what is their waist circumference? And I believe it's over 40 for men,
Mhm.
40 inches. And that's a really big sign of being not so metabolically healthy, right?
Hmm.
So I think that there's a lot of markers out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I read a recent stat that said about 93.2% of Americans are in poor metabolic health, meaning they have some degree of insulin resistance and are somewhere on the spectrum from prediabetes to type 2 diabetes. Would you say that's an over exaggeration, or would you say that's probably pretty accurate?
I don't know. I mean, I was just recently on a little getaway. It's this beautiful place in Santa Fe, and I got to go for a few days. It was glorious. And what I
Good for
noticed,
you, Jen.
thank you. Yeah, it was really great. But what I noticed was all of the people that were walking around that were very, very heavy. And it was at
Mhm.
a health spa kind of a place. And I was pretty blown away. So that percentage felt about right. I actually left there saying that, gosh, I feel like 90% of those people were likely metabolically not healthy. It's not
Wow.
fair and that's not judging, but just looking at, again, one of those markers being that waist circumference. And I think it's great that we're in a time when I'm hoping more and more people are not so body image oriented,
Mm-hmm.
and I really want people to be metabolically healthy. And we'll talk
Yeah.
about that too, because if people are not metabolically healthy, what does that mean for their overall health? And these were a lot of younger people. They were in their 30s. And that's what my guess was anyway, as I was observing. And it really was kind of disturbing to me. And
Yeah.
I just feel like, the other thing I want to say about that is that's a visual marker. And there are people out there that are also visually, they might look very
Mm-hmm.
fit, thin. So they might be thin on the outside and maybe fat on the inside. And that is also can be dangerous. So that's when we really do want to be watching our markers, our metabolic health markers, and
Yeah.
knowing what our blood sugar is doing. I see it a lot in elite athletes as
Hmm.
well, where they're on that blood sugar roller coaster and they're just depending in order for them to do their sport, they are just, carbing up nonstop, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
used to do it as well as a biker, or a
Right.
and I would
Yeah.
be constantly like feed, 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 feed with glucose. So it can really trash our metabolic health, and we don't really
Mm-hmm.
know it.
Well, and that's the irony too, because I feel like, again, I mean, things are always changing in the health space, right? And at one point in time, I think the ideology was that you needed to eat very frequently in order to maintain a fast metabolism, right? It was like eat every few hours, eat snacks, eat, and
Yeah.
that's the worst thing you could do, right? And could you explain why? That's probably not the best thing if you're looking for metabolic flexibility.
Yeah, I would say for the overall public, general public, eating frequently like that is not something that is all that smart, and I'll explain why. And I also want to make sure that we always know that there are nuanced circumstances where somebody might need to eat more frequently, and that is okay. So I don't want anybody to hear any of this as bad or good. It's very individualized. So when we're trying to achieve metabolic flexibility, if we're feeding, I call it feeding, but if we're eating every couple of hours because that's what we were told, because that's going to keep the metabolic fire going, then
Mm-hmm.
we can be really harming ourselves in a certain way. And so a roller coaster, a blood sugar roller coaster means that you are on this high and low, and it's very extreme. Goes high, comes crashing down. And when we are in a really low blood sugar or lower, like we get the high, we get the low, what do we want when we're down low? More carbohydrate or glucose,
Mm-hmm.
sugar, because that's going to bring us up again and it's going to make us feel better. You see it a lot with kids. And I can't remember if I used this example before, but if you go to like a kid's birthday party, and they come in, they're pretty good, and then they sort of start to get tired and they sort of crash, and then it's time to eat, and then they're having, the cake, they get super hyper, and then by the end of a kid's birthday party, most of the kids are crying. And it's
Yep.
like, okay, it's
Yep.
time to go. They're on the floor. We have to drag them out of there. So that's one of those examples of that blood sugar roller
So
coaster.
true.
Right. And so what we
Yeah.
don't want is that. And that can create a lot, that high and low can create a lot of oxidative stress in the system slash inflammation. And what is
Mm-hmm.
a big time underlying cause of disease? Inflammation. So we're trying to really, again, remember balance. We want to
Mm-hmm.
balance. We want to balance our energy throughout the day, and we want to balance our inflammation so we're not always inflamed, our blood sugar, our energy. So if we can go from throughout the day with a balanced bit of energy, that's way better than being on that energy roller coaster where you're like, I'm dragging myself off the floor. Now I need to go
Yep.
and get a coffee or some sweet treat. So eating every day or every couple of hours, that's not sort of the nutrition advice that we're hearing now, which is
Mhm.
great. It's almost like we're going back into that old school kind of nutrition where it's, 3 balanced meals a day. For some people, it might be 2 meals a day, depending,
Right.
and I think that's really important to remember. They have to be balanced meals as well. So you're not eating just carbohydrate at a meal because that's going to
Yeah.
also throw us off, right? And it doesn't mean
Absolutely.
nobody can ever snack. It just means that we don't have to eat all the time. We hopefully don't have to eat before we go to bed. And I have so many people that tell me that, like, I need some food, or I can't fall asleep, or I wake up in the middle of the night, or I wake up first thing in the morning and I need food. That is a pretty decent sign of metabolic inflexibility.
Mhm. Yeah. No, it's so true, and honestly too, Jen, I feel like I've just started to become more aware of this within the past 5 years, specifically when CGMs became, like, all the rage and everyone had one. So, I hopped on that train, I got one, and it was so interesting for me to see certain things that really, really spiked my blood sugar that I otherwise would never have thought, and then that again teaches you how to food pair, right? Never have carbs by themselves. Always pair it with a fat or a protein, just little hacks like that. And you do notice a change, right? And I think there were so many times where I attributed like that afternoon slump to, this is how it is. Everyone experiences it, just the afternoon slump, right? But no,
Yeah.
look at what you ate for lunch. Was there enough protein and fat in that, or was it more carb heavy? So it's really interesting. And I am curious too, Jen, what are your thoughts on eating for your cycle? So there's also a lot of interesting literature around that, specifically when it comes to like the actual nutrition component, and then also when it comes to fasting. So I like to fast, but I also recognize there are certain times of your cycle where you shouldn't be fasting, right? Like your luteal phase, avoid fasting. Progesterone's very sensitive, but your menstrual phase, your follicular phase, like you can go hardcore. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said. And I love the work of Dr. Mindy Pels.
Mm-hmm.
I think, watch like her book, Fast Like a Girl, watching some of her YouTube videos and things, she really explains it well on that timing. And I also feel like we don't want to just jump in and go, this is what I'm doing all the time now.
Mm-hmm.
We do what works for us. And it's not for every single person. We're all different. And I also feel like anytime we're doing something like that, where we're, I don't know if you want to call it biohacking or just doing more lifestyle change, we also expect this.
Yeah.
We want things to change right away. We're kind of impatient, right? So I think that things like that if it's lifestyle or nutrition, it takes time. So give it a chance. Do it
Mm-hmm.
for a while. See if it helps. See if it impacts us. But I love that. And I happen to be outside of my cycle, ho hum, but it's really interesting because it's a totally different way, right?
Yeah.
So my fasting might look a little bit different than that. I can fast a little bit differently now because I'm not sure. We all still cycle, but I don't have to be doing the same thing as maybe somebody like you that's still cycling in that fasting realm. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It does change. We're not anything we do. I always tell people this: it's not set in stone. So just try things.
Yeah.
If somebody is in a cancering place, right? So they have cancer, they're undergoing treatment. Sometimes not that we ignore that idea around fasting, but we might do it. We just might have to go, oh, let's still try to fast for this time period, even though, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it, the timing is maybe not exactly perfect with your hormones, if that makes sense. So everybody's
Yeah.
different. But yes, I love it.
Absolutely.
I love fasting for cycles. And I like to sometimes around like the moon cycles. So there's a lot of people that aren't necessarily cycling women, but they can fast around the moon, and that can be kind of neat too.
Yeah. So interesting. I know, again, that's like a whole area that I just started to get interested in the past, I don't know, 5 years or so, but so much
Yeah.
there. And it is about experimenting with your body, right? And even for me too, like I find that whenever if I have to be very sharp for something, a podcast interview, a presentation at work, I like to be in a fasted state, so that's why I'll try to schedule interviews and presentations like in the morning time, and then I'll have maybe like a larger lunch than usual. But yeah, it's truly based on an individual and their schedule. But
Yes. Can I
going
stop
back,
really quickly, Jacqueline,
yeah,
just real quick about that. The other sign of sort of metabolic flexibility versus not is, are you able to go without food and feel good?
Mhm.
Are you feeling more sharp, or are you feeling like junk? So that's also a really good tell in terms of, am I metabolically flexible? Can I
Mm.
fast, or am I constantly needing to eat? Now, before our cycle, right, we kind of are building up, and that is a time when, we might have cravings, we might be hungry or so. During that time, listening in intuitively and going, this is a time when I want to eat more, I want to nourish
Yep.
my body more. So think about that too. Like, I don't know. If you can't go a couple hours without food, we have some work to do and we will get there. You're not going to all of a sudden start doing this big time fasts, or, we ease into it if we have that luxury.
Right. No, that makes complete sense. And going back to your observation, Jen, of the 30-year-olds and the younger generation who seem to be a bit overweight at your recent excursion, um, what do you think the root cause of that is? So, certainly, I mean, nutrition is at the heart, but are there any other components like lifestyle factors that can lead to metabolic inflexibility?
Yeah, I mean, if I were to guess, there's a lot of inactivity. So a lot of people are sedentary and they're not, and these are general. So this is not coming from, again, a judgmental place
Yeah.
at all. It's part of our lifestyle that we are living in.
Hmm.
We're driving a long ways, maybe to get to work. We're sitting at desks. We're not moving our bodies. We're probably eating a fair amount of processed food and sugar. We're sitting on phones, social media, all the things. I think it's all a combination. Maybe our bodies are so stressed because maybe we're not sleeping. In a stressed state, our metabolism slows down. So it's harder to lose weight. I also
Hmm.
think that there is something about what's happening right now where people are cool with it.
Hmm.
And that's great. And I'm all about that. And I want people to be healthy, and I want them to live healthy lives so their joints feel good and so they can continue to, you know, be around and hopefully be disease free.
Yeah,
So there is an
absolutely.
element of prevention that I would love for people to know. And maybe there's an education piece too that they don't know.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. Well, see, that's why I love having conversations like these because there are a lot of people who don't know, right? And they're just not aware. But once they hear, it opens their eyes to a lot of things in terms of how they're feeling, maybe chronic illnesses they've been dealing with, and really prompts them to change. But going back to nutrition, which we know really is the heart, what are some key dietary strategies for improving our metabolic health?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest things we can do is not eat at night.
Mhm.
So there are so many people, again, that I work with that are very sort of attached to their evening snack, their
Mhm.
evening popcorn, whatever it is. Later on, they get munchy, they want to sit and watch TV, wind down, and they're eating. And what that can do is really disrupt sleep. It can disrupt hormone balance. It can
Mhm.
it can perpetuate that blood sugar roller coaster, and it's not so good for us. And so if we can start there by not eating at night, so now we've kind of closed out that sort of eating window a little bit, like we talk about, right, with intermittent fasting. So if somebody gets up in the morning, or let's say somebody finishes eating dinner at 7 p.m. and now they go to bed at 10. So they've got a decent 3 hour window between dinner and bedtime. That's
Would
awesome.
you say that's a good window too, Jen? Like 3 to 4 hours? Okay.
Yes, 3 to 4 hours is fabulous. There's a lot of research that shows that an early dinner time does all kinds of things for our health, whether it's
Mhm.
metabolic health or all of it, right? So 3 to 4 hours before bed. And yeah, so I like the 6 or 7. I think that paying attention to the seasons is really
Yeah.
important. So in the wintertime, it's dark by 6. If we can eat during daylight, that's a really lovely way to be if we can,
Yeah.
right? So think about that. So at 7 p.m., you stop eating and you go until the next morning, right? And that might take people a little bit. So if somebody's like, you know what, I really have to eat something and they've got it in their head, I'm like, okay, then at night, eat some protein or fat. Please don't
Mhm.
eat fruit
Yep.
or, the carby things like ice cream, popcorn, things like that. Eat some
Yeah.
protein, a couple of bites. Maybe that will help them, and then they can kind of start getting out of that habit. Because a lot of times it is more probably psychosomatic for some people. Some people
100%.
right? The body gets used to what we do.
Yeah.
So then you go until, if you go 13 or 14 hours is usually where I start people without food. You get to sleep for most of that, right?
Mhm.
So now you go from dinner time to the next day, and maybe now it's, 8 or 9 a.m. in the morning, right? If you stopped eating at 7. So that is a really great start. And you might land there, and that might be okay. And now when you look at this eating window piece, these are the feeding hours, I would say. This is where our next step is to not graze throughout that window. So you're not
Mhm.
just nonstop snacking, and you're not nonstop, running through the kitchen and cruising through the cupboards or the fridge and things like that. You really want to sit and have, and I say sit and have these balanced meals where you are
Yeah.
not on your phone, you're not on your computer, and you're being very present with your food and looking at it, having gratitude for it, tasting it,
Mhm.
smelling it, all those things. And you look and you ask yourself, about where's my carbohydrate in this meal? Hopefully it's a lot of veggies. Where's
Mhm.
my fat? Hopefully it's a lot of olive oil, olives, avocados, things like that. And where's my protein? And that's really, really important to see that balanced meal where the majority of the plate is looking like a lot of beautiful, colorful plants,
Yeah.
you know? And then hopefully you go to lunchtime, and now you go to dinner. So you don't have to always be snacking every couple of hours. So
Yeah.
did I answer that question at
You
all?
did. No,
Okay.
you hit the nail on the head, Jen. And two points to that. So I think first of all, going back to eating before bed, you hit, I mean, there's so much research out there that shows that when you do eat before bed, right, your digestive system is on. It has to digest the food. So that basically recruits energy that your body could be using elsewhere that you need to renew your cells at night, that it's putting towards digestion. So it's taking that energy and you don't want to lose that energy, right? So that's one reason. And then secondly, too, yeah, you don't want to necessarily be having blood sugar spikes at night while you're sleeping. And interestingly, too, I always like to experiment, right? So I got an Aura ring. It was my Christmas gift to myself a few months ago. Actually, not a few months ago, almost half a year ago.
Nice.
It's not crazy, but
Hmm.
I did have a night where I was snacking and I was just stressed out. And I often find that whenever I'm stressed, right, that's when the fridge opens and the food comes out, as with most people. But it was really interesting because the next morning on my Aura ring, it showed how my sleep was compromised. And I was like, this, like, what happened? Like, I went to bed on time and I really looked at it and it said, cause it like things that could contribute to sleep disruption, late night snacking. And I was like, oh, that was me. So it's just interesting to actually like see with all of these, you know, monitors that we have and to actually see what's going on inside our bodies in response to our habits. And I think that is one of the really key ways that you could initiate change, at least for myself. So I love that.
Well, and I think too, you also probably recognized using that continuous glucose monitor that it's not just about food. And I think that's really important for us to remember, because people will be like, my blood sugar's all over the place and I'm eating this quote unquote perfect diet, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not snacking and I'm not doing this, and what's going on? Well, I mean, stress has a huge play in our blood sugar. So here you are, you're like, I'm stress eating. And
Mm-hmm.
I noticed my, sleep was poor, your blood sugar was probably wonky. So I think that's a really important thing to remember, that when we are stressed out, there's a cortisol push, and that in turn, it's kind of a signal right to the body that there's stress, we're in trouble. So we
Right.
might need some glucose. So the body does that for us. It's like, here you go, but we might not actually need it. And
Right.
so that can create, again, that blood sugar roller coaster without even eating food.
Yeah, no, exactly. I know I shared with you several months ago that my mom was kind of in that situation where she was eating quote unquote perfect clean diet and her glucose was still elevated. And we were like, what is going on here? But you do have to look at lifestyle factors and stress. And I think too, it's funny when I had my CGM and there were times where, again, I'd be in a fasted state, but I'd be talking to someone or having a podcast interview, and I'd look back and I'd see these massive spikes. And I was like, what was going on? And then I realized I was excited, right? I was just like in a
Mhm.
state, I was in a flow state, I was talking with someone I loved, but that could cause a spike too, right? So not all spikes are bad.
No.
Sauna use can cause spikes. And I think too, one thing I kind of got hung up on for a little bit that I shared with my listeners and followers is that even if you do have a spike, the goal is to not have any spikes, right? That's just a spike is a natural response to food that we're going to eat. It's just ensuring that the spike doesn't go super high. So if someone has, some blueberries with yogurt and their spike is probably higher than if they didn't have blueberries, it doesn't mean stop eating blueberries, right? It just means to maybe add some more protein in it. And again, go by how you're feeling, right? I think that's most important.
Yeah, and looking at your recovery too, right? Like how is your blood sugar recovering if you go up, if it goes up? And
Yeah,
that's another important thing to watch, but I think you're exactly right. It's learning from it. And we can be very sort of fear-based and kind of like black and white and super intense about it, like, and then people will never touch a blueberry again when there's a
I
lot of
know.
really great nutrients in berries and things like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I that's why when I said in the beginning, I don't like to label things good or
Yeah.
bad.
No, I love that. And one thing I love about you and everything you stand for is you truly are all about balance. And I did have a question. I was always curious about this, Jen. So if someone completely cut out fruit from their diet, let's say, they believe fruit is evil and I'm not going to have it. And then let's say maybe a year goes by and they reintroduce it into their diet because they hadn't had it for, X amount of time. Does that necessarily mean that their bodies are not going to respond in a proper way to it as if they had been eating it the entire time? Like, will it cause more of an elevated spike than like a normal individual who does include it in their diet?
I'm not sure about that. I would imagine it's kind of individualized, and I would
Yeah.
imagine it depends again on what the rest of their body's doing. Like, what's we always talk about the terrain, like, what's the terrain doing and what are their labs looking like?
Yeah.
So, that is an interesting concept. Are they eating a lot of other carbohydrate rich foods, or are they going from a very low carbohydrate diet without any fruit, and all of a sudden they're now adding a lot of carbohydrates? Because it is it can be, if you're very low carb and all of a sudden you add fruit back in, it can be quite a bit,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Depending on the fruits. So again, not that fruit is bad. It's how does your body handle it,
Right.
right? What are our goals? And if we're talking about people kind of in the prevention space where we're wanting to like live our life and be disease free and be super healthy and we're on this path of wellness, great. If we're working with somebody who has a lot of imbalances, pre-diabetes or diabetes or cancer or other inflammatory disease, then we're pretty careful. So I would imagine that the body might be in a little bit of a state of shock if they went from having very few carbs to all of a sudden eating
Right.
fruit.
Yeah. That makes
I
complete
think,
sense.
choosing the fruits that really give you a lot of bang for your buck,
I was
like,
just going to ask you this. You read my
mhm,
mind.
like berries are awesome because they have so many lovely nutrients in them. That's a really great option, and fibrous, so they have more fiber and things like that. But I think what happens is we we eat, first of all, we think, oh, these fruits are really healthy, which I'm not saying they're not, but then we go, oh, I'm going to just have a banana.
Yeah.
And we're going to get a pretty wicked blood sugar spike from that.
Yeah.
So, what about a quarter of a banana with some other things like some protein and fat? How about having
Hmm.
it maybe after your meal rather
Hmm.
than in the middle as a snack, in
Yeah.
between meals as a snack? Things like that. If you're making a smoothie or a shake, then what about using avocado instead of the
Hmm.
banana and some berries instead? And you still get that creamy texture and you still get potassium and
Yeah.
magnesium and fiber. And so
Yeah.
that's what I kind of do, just to look at, like, because we're looking at blood sugar impact, and
Yeah.
a lot of fruit can create those
Absolutely. Yeah,
spikes.
I couldn't agree more. And again, it is about awareness because I mean, again, years ago, I would think that getting one of those naked juices, right? When I was little and I would go to Whole Foods with my mom, like that was the first thing I went to, that aisle, got my naked fruit juice and like it looked green and beautiful and healthy. And then you turn it around and it's like, wow, there's 60 grams of sugar in here. And again, it's not necessarily like cane sugar, but like sugar is still sugar and it can still cause a blood spike, especially
Yeah,
if, consumed on its own. So, yeah,
you got
super, super interesting.
it. Is.
One other thing I really wanted to touch on, Jen, more so for myself, but I know a lot of people struggle with this too, is emotional eating, right?
Mm-hmm.
So going back to those late night snackers out there, oftentimes stress is at the heart of, overconsumption when it comes to food. So
Yeah.
what are some strategies that you have for people when they're in the moment, they're, in a stressful state, they're in a weak spot and all they want to do is just eat? How can they overcome those feelings?
Yeah, I think that there are so many, and it's about, having a toolbox for that. What are some other things that, first of all, it's recognizing it, right? It's becoming
Mm-hmm.
aware. Oh, I'm seeing this connection between me being stressed out or sad or whatever it might be, and food. And I'm looking to that food for comfort. And oftentimes, that comfort food is also probably not the beautiful salad with a ton of rainbowy vegetables and protein on it, right? So, making that first awareness, not to beat up on ourselves, but to see the connection and understand it. And that can be really helpful. And then having some tools in the toolbox so you're aware, you're like, "Oh, look at that. Look at what I want to go do. And here are some things that I could do instead." And
Yeah.
that can be helpful. So maybe it is run a bath and make a cup of tea. Maybe it's just make a cup of tea. Maybe it's go for a 10-minute walk. Maybe it's do a 5-minute meditation. I like to use Insight Timer because it's a
Mm.
free app on my phone, and it's awesome because you can select how many minutes you want to do. So you can literally go in there and get a whole slew of meditations that are 5 minutes. And there's
Wow.
some that are really appropriate for like midway through the day, maybe evening. It's really cool. So that's a nice thing to do, and it doesn't take a lot of time. Like I said, I think I said breath work. So even
Mm-hmm.
if you're doing some conscious breath work, maybe you pick up your journal. Maybe you call somebody on the phone that's
Yeah.
on your list of people you haven't connected with for a while. And so doing some other things that will bring you that emotional nourishment rather than what feels like you're emotionally nourishing yourself, but you do it and then you're like, oh, and now you're just more stressed
Mm-hmm.
because you ate that thing that maybe you were not wanting to necessarily eat, or you ate
Yep.
outside of your eating window. So having some tools. The other thing too is if your blood sugar is balanced, usually people aren't going to do that as much. Now, that's not to say that like, your blood sugar isn't balanced or you're not metabolically flexible. However, we can use some of these tools where we can help with that emotional eating. So if you're on a roller coaster already, then the chances of you eating a bunch of garbage when you're getting stressed is greater. The cravings are going to
Right.
be. So if you start your morning or your day, your first meal with adequate protein, I think, and it's maybe a more savory morning
Mm-hmm.
meal, that can really set us up for having a balanced day. Try it, you know.
Yeah.
And then when you are in that maybe place of emotionally wanting to eat, you might have a better way about you where you're like, oh, nah. And you know what? If you do it, give yourself a hug and, move on. It's
Yeah.
okay. And I think we're
Yeah.
way too hard on ourselves. I really do.
No, I love that and I couldn't agree more. And it really does come down to learning by experience. And in the past, when I would intermittent fast like all the time and I didn't necessarily align it with my cycle, I would I would stop eating around, I don't know, like 7 o'clock at night, and I'd have my first meal at 11 o'clock the next day or 11:30 or 12, thinking, oh, I've been in a fasted state. It's great. But what I would find, Jen, is because I didn't have that protein first thing in the morning, I'd be more inclined to not binge eat, but like binge eat in a way on things that, weren't necessarily probably the healthiest for me around 4 or 5 o'clock that same day because my body didn't have adequate protein in the morning. So breakfast is by far my favorite meal of the day. I've changed my stance on that. And again, I think my schedule now is such that I'll wake up, I'll have breakfast by 9 o'clock, I'll have lunch, and then I'll wrap up dinner, Jen, by 5:30,
Love
six
it.
o'clock. and I will not eat past. And I feel so good when I sleep at night. In the morning, I wake up well rested. I don't have that heavy feeling that you have in your stomach, the morning after you eat a really, heavy meal right before you go to sleep. And I think oftentimes you have to experience those feelings to really, understand that that's not how you want to feel in the future and adjust your habits accordingly.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's a really beautiful way. I think that what happens sometimes with like when we're talking about kind of general public, the fear is it's summer, it's so hard to eat early. The kids are at sports,
Mm-hmm.
we have barbecues to go to and all these things. And that's where, I kind of go, okay, what if most of the time you're able to do that? Where you eat earlier. Is there a
Yeah.
way or even ease into it where you have 3 days during the week that you're doing that, you're eating a really early dinner? You know,
Yeah.
I think it's what you just described in my mind is very perfect. And if you need to eat a little later, or maybe you eat first, and then you go to watch the sports game, the kids
Right.
sports, or go the barbecues might be a little bit tougher. I mean, I've certainly eaten before I've gone to various events.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I love it. Another lifestyle thing that we didn't talk about for blood sugar balance too is doing a walk after your meal. And so it
Mm-hmm.
can be really lovely, especially in the summer, where you can go on a nice evening walk in that
Yep.
time space where you might normally be eating dinner. You finish at 5:30, maybe you clean up the kitchen and you go for a walk. It's gorgeous
Yep.
that time of night.
That's my go-to and my mom's as well. And if I'm not with her, we always call after dinner while we're on our walk. And it doesn't have to be long, right? 10-15 minutes. And walking
Yes.
is honestly one of the best exercises for us. I read a stat the other day, Jen, that was like for if you walk 20 minutes a day, you can extend your life by 3 years.
Oh,
Just
wow.
20 minutes a day. Um, Crazy. And I am curious too, what are your thoughts on fasted workouts?
Oh, it's so individual.
Yeah,
I love it. So I
same.
feel way better. And then I like to run and I like to bike, and there are people that are like, mm-mm, no way. So for me, I feel a lot better, and I can actually go quite a long time without needing that food. Back in the day, no way. So
Yeah.
I always feel better fasted.
Yeah, no, I do too. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Or if I will choose to eat breakfast, I'll wait probably an hour before working out. But even then, so I don't quite feel the same.
I
Um,
agree.
but going back to carbs, there's also this whole area now, and a lot of people have been talking about this of carb cycling, right?
Mhm.
Also known as metabolic confusion. So we spoke about fasting in the context of a woman's cycle. Let's use just a male, for example. What are your thoughts on extended fasts? So fasts that can be, from 24 to 72 hours. I've heard people, talk about doing those like once a month. Some do it once a year. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, my annoying answer is always it depends, because we really look at the person and what they're going through. And so it really depends. I mean, I work a lot in the cancer space. And so
Mhm.
we utilize a lot of these longer fasts for people that are undergoing treatment, whether it's radiation, chemotherapy, things like that. And we have a lot of success with that for a number of reasons. So it really depends on what the goals are, but it also depends on, this whole like test, assess, address that is said
Mhm.
by Dr. Nisha Winters all the time. Like, that's really important to know where people are and what their goals are.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know that everybody needs to do all these long fasts, and it's asking the why. And, I said it in the beginning, but if we don't have the basics taken care of, and I see this all the time where people are jumping right into doing these long fasts or whatever it is, these really extreme things, and they're not even drinking enough water.
Mhm.
So I call it's kind of like if you don't have the foundation built, it's like trying to put in walls without a foundation, you know,
Yeah.
and that just doesn't work. So I think that it's very bio individualized. I think that if we do anything for too long, I like what you said about what did you say about confusion, metabolic confusion? You said
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
That's how I yep.
If we do the same thing all the time, every single day, and we're super duper routine, the body just gets used to that thing. So I do
Exactly.
believe in switching things up,
Yeah.
whatever that means for you. The again, fast like a girl, what Dr. Pelz talks about too is this 5-1-1 fasting. And I've been
Mhm.
playing around with that where 5 days of the week I'm eating a lower carbohydrate diet. I'm eating my normal sort of intermittent fasting, whatever I do that works for me. And
Mhm.
then one day a week, I might broaden the eating window a little bit and have a breakfast.
Yeah.
I tend to not eat a lot of breakfast. I do a little bit about with what you used to do.
I
But
was gonna
again,
ask you.
of
Yeah.
my cycle. So
Right.
that makes a big difference.
Right.
And that's just what feels good to me. I also listen in and I don't say every Saturday is my day that I'm only going to eat, or that I'm going to eat breakfast. Like I try to listen into
Yeah.
my body and what it's wanting. And it's not perfect ever. So 5 days a week, I might do those, my kind of norm, right? That lower carbohydrate, I eat pretty low carb. And then one day a week, I broaden it out. I might increase my carbs a little bit more, like have some sweet potato or,
Mhm.
different kinds of fruit, things like that. And then one day a week, I might do, say, a longer fast. Maybe it's 18
Yeah.
hours, maybe it's a one day, a one meal. So I play
Yeah.
around with that. I also do longer fasts, especially with travel, because I just
Yeah.
feel better.
Yeah.
So it really depends. And I do think that everybody's different and it's just hard because it gets confusing when we're listening to podcasts, we're reading books and we're like, oh, I'm
I
supposed to do
know.
something. Oh,
Yep.
I'm not supposed to eat after 4 o'clock. Well, that
Yep.
might not work for everybody's lifestyle.
Right. Information overwhelm. And I think the irony too is that that just creates stress, which by far, in my opinion, is worse than just, I mean, it's worse than eating like a donut, for example, if you're consistently stressed and your body's in that fight or flight state. And then just like being scared of food. What's that term that it's when you're afraid to eat something? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know
There's like a
well,
terminology for it. It'll come to me. But it's yeah, it's basically when like people just become fearful of food because
yeah,
if they go eat out and something's not 100% organic or there might be canola oil, like it creates all this fear. And again, recognizing that you almost have the word. It's on the tip of my tongue.
me
But like
too.
recognizing that like we probably shouldn't go out to eat every night of the week, but like when you do, you also have to live your life and you also have to like have a healthy mindset about whatever it is that you're eating because that really will impact again the nutritional value that your body absorbs and takes from that meal.
Yeah.
I am curious too, Jen. What is your so I know you switch things up, which I love, but like today, for example, what's on your menu today for food?
Well, you're going to like this because I am fasting right now. I'm doing a little travel, so I'm doing a little bit of a fast. So I think I'm on maybe like 30 some hours right now.
That's
So
amazing.
I am drinking some of my mushroom coffee right now,
Yep.
and I'm having electrolytes in my water, and I'll drink probably some herbal tea throughout the day and a ton of water. So that's what I'm doing. I'll break my fast tomorrow. So,
What will you break your fast with? Because this is very important.
I personally feel best when I break my fast with some really high quality broth, bone broth usually, and
Hmm.
I heat it up in a pan and I chop part of an avocado up and I put it in a bowl and then I pour the
Yeah.
hot broth over it. Sometimes
Wow.
I will also take an egg and I'll do that and like I like to whisk it in a bowl on the side and then I make almost like an egg drop soup in the broth.
Ooh, that
So it
sounds so
cooks,
good.
I add a ton of salt, and that's kind of what I do. So then I've got the protein and the fat and some carbohydrate from the avocado,
Yeah.
the fiber, and that is what feels right for me.
Yeah.
So I can't eat like a big giant salad,
Hmm.
but yeah, that's what feels right for me. So that's what I do. And yeah, I'll see how I feel. I do test my blood sugar and my ketones while I'm fasting because I think that's really
Yeah.
important. I usually feel pretty I do it I feel like I do it frequently enough that I'm not doing as much detoxing. And
Hmm.
sometimes when people do like their first longer fast, I feel like often on like day 2, they feel like junk and they just want to lie down. And not
Yep.
that I've not had that happen, of course I have, but
Yep.
I'm just trying to support my detox as well while I'm doing it. So like I took a Epsom salt bath last night.
Good.
There's I have a little sauna blanket that I use sometimes. And so I try to support that. And I try to have bowel movements. So I'm
Mhm.
detoxing that way and while I'm fasting. So that's a total side note. But yeah.
Yeah, so smart. No, I
Yeah.
love that. I know I find that for me, the second day of fasting is always the most challenging. The longest one I've ever done, I think, was 60 hours. I would like to make it to 72, just because I
Yeah.
like to again experiment. But yeah, I find that the second day is the hardest. But again, to your point, I mean, hydrating with electrolytes, you can still have coffee as long as it's black. Those are
Mhm.
all kind of little hacks that help really get you through.
Yeah, and everybody has a different idea of what it means to fast, right? We can
Yeah,
also do the, like more of a fasting mimicking diet. We like to do more of a DIY. So you have fewer calories. So it's like a calorie kind of look. I don't want to say restricted, but kind of calorie restricted diet for a few
right.
days. That can be really gentle for folks as they're easing into it. It's really what is best for you, and no, and you don't have to fast. You have to ask, what is my why? I know
Yeah,
that it helps me feel good and it helps my clarity and it just feels right for me, but not everybody.
yeah.
However, with that said, if you can't go a couple hours without food, we've got some work to do.
Right. No,
So,
100%. That makes complete sense. One other thing that came to mind too, because you were talking about sweet potatoes before, and I was like, I love sweet potatoes. Can you differentiate for listeners between a simple or bad carbohydrate versus a complex carbohydrate? And in that same vein, the subsequent difference between a high glycemic versus low glycemic food. Because I feel like, again, nowadays there's a lot of fear mongering and there's this, idea of carbs are bad, all carbs are bad, avoid carbs. But it's a lot, there's a lot more to that. So can you kind of unpack that?
yeah, and it is, again, it's a very bio individualized approach. When we're working with somebody who has cancer, we're wanting them to be very metabolically healthy. And so oftentimes we will pull back their carbs quite a lot. And that is very important and can be very, very effective without fear mongering, without saying bad and good, right? On certain foods or labeling certain foods as toxic or bad. I'm really careful with that language because I feel like power and intention is really important here too. So,
Yeah.
again, if somebody's looking for just to create metabolic flexibility and be more metabolically healthy, what we can do is, and some people can eat more carbs than others, right? We look at genetics and we look at lab work and all the things. But when we're talking about simple versus complex carbs, I like to usually think about it as how quickly does something turn to sugar in the body, right? And so if you take something like um, candy and you put that in, like it's all sugar, right? It's all sugar, and that is going to spike your blood sugar quite a lot. So that's going to be very high glycemic or a glycemic food. It's a very simple carb. It's going to shoot you up. If you've got somebody that is diabetic and they go super low, they can drink a Coke or eat candy and they can get their blood sugar to go up if they have dropped scary low, right? And
Mhm.
so that's a simple carbohydrate, something that turns to sugar quickly. Think about white foods like rice, white rice. That has been kind of processed quite a lot and it's going to turn to sugar more quickly than probably a brown rice. It kind of depends on the person, but so,
Yeah.
if something is high glycemic food, it's going to be probably more of a simple carb. If it's lower glycemic, it's going to have more maybe fat or more fiber in it. The fiber will slow down the sugar load. That's why when we take juice in without anything else, we have stripped out anything that's going to slow that sugar load. And now
Yeah.
you're getting like a sugar shot to the system. If you keep the fiber in, you're going to have less of a sugar spike. It's less glycemic. Does that make
Right.
sense? And
Absolutely.
so I like to food pair as well because we can change the glycemic impact by having some carbs. Maybe it's sweet potato, right? Maybe you don't eat a sweet potato the size of your head. Maybe you have a half or a quarter and you keep the skin on because what does that skin have? A ton of fiber. Plus, it
Yep.
tastes really good. Now we want to fatten it up because that fat can slow the sugar load as well. And we put some really
Coconut
great
oil.
Yeah, coconut oil. I use grass-fed butter or ghee. I put a
Yeah.
bunch of salt on it. I also have it as part of a meal. Remember those balanced meals.
Yeah.
So I hopefully won't have as much of a blood sugar spike. So it's changing the glycemic impact of the food by pairing it with other things, keeping the fiber in the food. Not also if you think about like raw versus cooked. So we can
Mm-hmm.
change the impact of glycemic foods by keeping them raw. Not that you're going to eat a raw sweet potato, but think about a carrot. So you have
Yeah.
some carrot, say it's grated carrot on your salad or chopped up carrot. Raw with the skin on, organic, it's going to have less of a glycemic impact on your body than it is if you've roasted those carrots because that's making them more sugary, more
Yeah.
glycemic. Same thing with beets. A little bit of raw beet with the skin, great. Put it in the oven and roast it and make it all caramelized and sugary. Now you're going to probably get more of a blood sugar spike. And you can watch that in like a CGM or something,
Yeah.
right? So that's where I go. I'm like, first of all, look at the person and how is their metabolic flexibility. Some people can have these higher glycemic foods and some people can't. They're more sensitive until we get them balanced. Then maybe
Yeah.
we can add it back in. So what I want to say about glycemic, so people look at glycemic index as a number. So all these foods have a certain number of glycemic index. And if somebody has a diabetes diagnosis, they might look at that chart and they're like, "Ooh, I can't eat that food because the index is too high." Which makes sense, but we can change the glycemic index again by pairing it with other foods. And there's something called the glycemic load. And I
Mm-hmm.
encourage people to look at the glycemic load more because it actually takes into account how much food you're having, how much of that food. So it's
Interesting.
about volume rather than just glycemic index of the food. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? So if you
Absolutely.
look at glycemic index of a piece of white bread versus a watermelon.
Mm-hmm.
So they might have the same glycemic index, but in order to get to the same glycemic load of one slice of bread, you might have to eat a half a watermelon.
Wow. That's
Okay, so
crazy.
glycemic load is important. And I love that little fun fact. So when we're talking about simple carbs versus complex carbs, you're not going to eat those foods by themselves anyway. So eat fiber and eat fat and eat protein. Don't eat those carbs alone and
Right.
don't eat sugar,
Mm-hmm.
processed foods if possible, right?
Yeah.
They're higher
Absolutely.
glycemic and inflammatory. Does that
Absolutely.
answer?
That was a beautiful 10 out of 10 explanation. I'm
Okay.
sure you clarified so many things for listeners. So thank you for that. And I love that, Jen. And you mentioned before something about until we get that person back into metabolic flexibility. So how quickly can, and I know it's going to be individualized, but let's say best case scenario, someone starts implementing these new dietary and lifestyle changes. How quickly can they start to see changes in their metabolic health?
I think it depends on what we're tracking for change. I think that some people can feel better and start sleeping better and have better energy really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
like right away. They can bring down their inflammation. All of a sudden, people feel better. They're like, oh, walking feels better to me. Now I'm more inclined to go out for a walk because it doesn't
Yeah.
hurt. It actually feels good. So you get those neurotransmitters that are kind of firing and making us happier and more light, right? If we're sleeping better, everything's better, you know? And it's
100%.
not that it's just a quick fix. It takes work, it takes dedication, and we don't have to be, super strict about it. We can ease into it again if we have that luxury. So, but I believe that once people, honestly, if people do like I always think about like the 21-day fixes, right? Like a 21-day sugar fix. Get that out of your system for 21 days and you're going to feel so much better,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll probably kick those cravings. So that's really huge too when we don't want it anymore. Some people they just
Absolutely.
love sweets, you know. Um, some people like savory better. So
Right.
it's always getting to know who we're working with and understanding them. But oftentimes, especially when we have sugar addiction, it's like a drug. It's really,
It
really
is.
hard.
Yeah. There's studies that have shown it lights up same parts of the brain as cocaine, just sugar.
Mm,
It's
yeah.
insanity. But I
Yeah.
think too when we can become addicted to the feeling of what good health actually feels like, you don't necessarily want to go back. Like if someone does offer you, I don't know, Boston cream donut from Dunkin' Donuts, which used to be my livelihood when I was younger,
Yeah.
I don't really find that appealing anymore because I think how my body is going to feel afterwards, right? So it's about changing, the perspective and really viewing food as fuel, right?
Yeah.
Rather than just something to indulge in because it makes you feel better.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think food is fuel. Food can be medicine. Food can be joyful too and comfort.
yeah.
So it's what does that mean? It doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to go to Dunkin' Donuts because there's my comfort, but we start to learn about nourishing our body and our minds and our souls with these beautiful foods. And I believe that anyone can do that. And it does, it's not, I'm not trying to say it's like snap of fingers and you're there.
Yeah.
It takes time, and it takes loving yourself and not beating up on yourself, because I think that's what a lot of people do.
No, 100%. And it also doesn't have to be an all or nothing mentality. And I think when folks really start to assess like where they are in their nutrition journey and start realizing, okay, I may have to cut this one thing out, but I could substitute it with this other thing, right? Like healthy almond flour banana bread. Like there are so many healthy, nourishing, good tasting treats that we can make, right? So it's also about finding proper substitutes, I think, to make that journey of, kind of clearing out some old habits all the easier. So I love that, Jen.
Well, and I love that you use the word treat, Jacqueline, because I don't love the word cheat, because that just means bad. That's just negative. If we're having a celebratory treat, that's what it's all about. And you're
Yeah,
right, not being perfect. I think there's too much of that thought. Well, it's all or nothing. And if I'm not perfect, then I'm just going to throw in the towel. And that's not
yeah,
life. We're looking at
couldn't agree more.
longevity and lifestyle and wellness, not from this extreme thing to the next extreme thing to the next extreme thing. And that's for, again, the general public that are looking for prevention and overall wellness. And then when we have people that are dealing with some sort of a diagnosis, we might have to do sort of more of a therapeutic
Yeah,
plan, um, always with the goal of being able to be in that lifestyle place, right?
absolutely.
So.
I love that. Jen, when's your cookbook coming out? I'm serious. You need to. I will be your first customer. You need to write one because honestly, everything that you say that you have, even when you were just highlighting what you use to break your fast, I was like, yes, this is me.
It really, yes, it needs to happen. And we're collecting some really great recipes. And yeah, we share
Good.
them, as you know, but I
I
also think
do.
the book would be awesome.
Yes.
I would love
Yeah.
it.
Everyone, Jen has an incredible Instagram account. I know your daughter works actively on that too. You have the best recipes. But Jen, this has been so, so wonderful. Again, you're such a wealth of information. And I just love you and everything that you're doing in this space. And you're helping so many people. But where can listeners find you?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, which is remissionnutrition.com. And we have Instagram as well, and Facebook. Both are at Remission Nutrition. So that's how you
Wonderful.
can find us. Yes. And
Awesome.
yeah, we would love to hear from people. And we've got some great information on our website, actually. So that's been really nice. We have quite a few consultants on our team that do oncology nutrition consulting. Sarah just finished her training in fitness as well, for
That's
specific to
awesome.
cancer, which is
Wow.
really neat. We're working too, we'd love to do more in this prevention space.
Yeah.
So we don't just work with people who are going through a diagnosis or for cancer. So we're really looking to expand into that more. And that feels really good to me. But we also have a whole section under resources, I think, and it's more like classes and podcast interviews and things that more than just I have done. So if anybody's interested
Awesome.
in hearing more, yeah, that's a good place.
Wonderful. I will definitely include the links to all of those in the show notes. And
Awesome.
my last question for you, Jen, you already answered this before, so you can answer it as you feel now, but what does being well and strong mean to you?
I couldn't remember what I said last time.
It's going to
So,
be beautiful again, so
well, what it means to me right now, today, is balance, not perfection.
Mm,
And I kind of came up with that even before, like our talk today. And it
I
just
love that.
feels so right based on all the things we've been talking about. So balance, not perfection. And there's too much shaming, there's too much fear-based stuff going on. And we just do the best you can. Small changes are really, really impactful. For me, I don't want ever to be perceived as I do all these things perfect. I
Yep.
don't want to be all or nothing. And so, really being kind and gentle with myself. Um, and being in, you said the word flow earlier, being in my flow with balance is really important. And when like, there's ways for me, I'm like, I evaluate and I'm like, ooh, you are not in balance right now. And that looks like various things that can be me on social media too much or
Yep.
on my computer too much, where all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting up in the morning because I've got all these things to do and I'm going right to my computer. What?
Yep.
And so having those boundaries around, work and life and joy and um, fitness, exercise, the outdoors. I've started to read fiction and
I
at night.
love that.
And that is helping me. I mean, it's been amazing. So I think that is what it is for me. Being well and strong means balance.
Yeah. That's beautiful, Jen. I love that. That just reminded me. Have you ever read The Gap and the Gain?
Mm-mm.
Great book. I'll text it to you. But I started reading that last night, and essentially it says, to change your paradigm of how you measure your progress in the sense of measuring yourself against the gain versus the gap. So instead of where you're at now to your ideal, measure
Mhm.
where you started from where you're at now. And that just changed everything for me because I think we always measure ourselves in anything we do, any area of life, up against this ideal we have. And we'll always fall short, right? Because that's perfection. No one can ever reach perfection. So if
Yeah.
you really just measure it against, okay, like this is where I started and this is where I'm at now, it's empowering, it's encouraging, and it makes you want to keep going, right? Rather than throwing in a towel, no matter where you're at, whether you're at one step or 10 steps ahead. So
Yeah, I love that. That's really
yeah.
great. I'll read that not at night because it's not fiction. No, I'm just kidding. I'll
Yeah,
read
just
that
read it in the
during the
morning.
day. Yeah, exactly. I'm reading The Women right now.
Ooh, I love
Mhm.
that. Yeah, I need to get back into fiction. I mean, summer months are nearing, so that's a call for fiction.
Yeah,
Well, Jen, this has been so much fun as always. Thank you so much for your time. I'm super excited to share this. And I'm excited for round 3 because there's always so much to discuss with you. So we'll just have to
always.
keep going.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day. I
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Jen.